Hey everyone, so happy to be back here. Honestly, it's so weird to just have to take a train to go to a Web3 conference. And I feel that having something growing here in Italy is extremely exciting. So super happy to be here. I wanted to be bringing one of the biggest updates that I've seen in the decentralized exchange space. This big and scary word, intense. You've probably seen it everywhere. And I wanted to dive a bit more into it, and more specifically, why is it something that's so exciting, and I think it's actually going to be revolutionizing the way we see DeFi. So DeFi has actually grown quite a bit from when ParaSwap started. It's kind of weird thinking how when you look at the first version of ParaSwap, it only had like 6 different exchanges in one single chain. From there, we've had like a much more complicated UI now. We have hundreds of exchanges, over 9 billion 9 billion in the last week, 78 billion lifetime volume from 23 million different transactions across 9 different chains. And this is not just talking about ParaSwap. I'm just using this as a personal example about why I've seen DeFi growing so much. But the very misleading thing is when you look at the actual DeFi volume, it doesn't really look like DeFi has been growing. This is, for example, a TVL graph that I took from DeFi Llama. It shows the total amount of value locked in the last 5 years. We see that beautiful spike when we saw like Eminem having a Bored Ape NFT, and we took a while to recover. However, I would like to show a more stable approach, a different perspective to show that DeFi is actually coming back at a better momentum, stronger than ever. So if we look now at the stablecoin volume, I believe this one to be a better metric. The reason is because obviously one stablecoin, one USDC is equal to one USDC. So as long as the value is actually onboarded, then it's going to be there until it leaves the DeFi ecosystem. So it's a very good indicator of the amount of onboarding we've actually been getting in DeFi. Because basically the dollar is going to be staying the same unless you Terra. And what we see and what we see here is, okay, maybe it doesn't look as good so far. It still looks like we have a peak in 2022 and then it starts going down. But I cropped it on purpose. We're actually, in terms of stablecoins, getting back to almost 2022 levels at 200 billion locked in TVL. And it's kind of a term that I came up in the spot when I looked at this graph. It's kind of like a quiet renaissance. DeFi is coming back. It's getting all of these real values locked. And people don't even notice it. There's all these talks about like, what's the state of DeFi? And it's actually been recovering stronger than ever. The why? Well, I'm not an analyst, so I'm not going to be giving you a very specific answer. I'll be throwing you a few different clues, and you choose which one has been the actual driving factor. For example, could it be scaling? This is from growthepie.xyz. It's a beautiful resource for seeing the development of L2s in the Ethereum ecosystem. And we see that like in just 1 year, we've seen doubling of TVL of stablecoins in all of the L2 ecosystems. So maybe like the cheaper gas fees and the better onboarding have been able to assist. Maybe it's been the regulatory side. And yeah, I know Americans really don't like it when we talk about European regulations, but at least compared to other countries, like crypto regulations have advanced a lot. For example, with Mika, there's now a very clear definition about what is a stablecoin, what is allowed and what isn't. I left a couple of examples there. I know the logos are very similar, so I'll say what each one of them are. Yeah, for example, Circle's Eurocoin, and then you have Monerium's URI. Both of them compliant stablecoins that now you can get, you know, they're compliant and you can use them on a day-to-day basis. Maybe that's one of the reasons. I'll move to the other side so I can show the other ones. Maybe it's the institutions. We've been getting a lot of big fintech and traditional banks onboarded onto the decentralized finance ecosystem. And usually it's difficult to actually see when somebody gets onboarded because you see all of these teaser news being like, I don't know, Visa is experimenting something, Sony is experimenting something. But the reality is there are so many of them that are already on-chain and we didn't even notice. I put a couple of examples that are already live. PayPal's USD is already live on Ethereum. And BlackRock's BUIDL, yes, with the D before, is also an on-chain real-world asset from one of the biggest assets managers in the world. So maybe that's another one. We see that like all of these companies are so confident in Ethereum and the EVM and DeFi ecosystem that they want to be onboarding their assets. Finally, maybe we've seen a lot more developments on the stablecoin side of things, be it from Aave with Go, be it from Curve and new mechanisms like Curve USD. Since 2022, we've gone a long way on how we want to be creating and distributing these kind of stablecoins. Soon, we're going to have, for example, Liquidity V2, a whole new way of making a decentralized stablecoin. So I know that I promised I was going to be talking about intents and not about stablecoins. So what am I getting at with all this? Basically, what I'm trying to say, and this is my personal opinion, not financial advice, but the next step is not in the macro. We have the developments from the real-world assets. We have a lot more regulatory clarity, at least on this side of the Atlantic, and we have all of these DeFi developments. So what is missing? And in my opinion, where we need to be looking for to move into the future of DeFi is actually in the micro. So just a random question, just to know a bit the audience. How many of you regularly trade on chain, have used like a DEX or like a DEX aggregator? Just a show of hands. Okay, so it's actually, this is very interesting. It's actually a lot more than last ETHMilan. We've been getting a lot more onboarding since the last one. The last time I asked, it was only a couple of hands. So for those that are not familiar, every time you want to be making an on-chain swap, you're interacting with what is basically a smart contract. The user has some assets, they have to be signing a transaction, they have to permit the transaction, and then the smart contract within a single block has to execute all the code to be able to make the code into reality. And for the half of the audience that is probably already trading on chain, I want to tell you something, and it's something that I've been noticing myself. We've been blinded by our degen glasses. There are so many blockers whenever we're trading that we just take for granted now that if we really want to be growing on DeFi and we want to be seeing more adoption, we really have to be getting out of the way. So for example, something as simple as this. I took the most simple example of a smart contract. Has so many steps where it could be going wrong in every single stage. For example, you want to be signing the transaction. You have to say how much gas you're going to be giving. We have estimations, we have ways of like putting the gas, but nobody has any idea how much it's going to be on the next block. There could be a huge spike, and you would have no idea of how to predict it. You have limited inputs. There's only so much data you can put into a smart contract. And because of the limited input, of course, on the smart contract side, you have limited outputs. For example, most contracts can only deal with 1 or 2 tokens at a time. You cannot put like 3 tokens in and 5 different out. It's usually 1 in, 1 out, because the contracts have to be written on the blockchain, and they have to be as lean as possible to be able to make it gas efficient and upgradable. And then, even if we make it all of this stage, which many users by now would have probably said, okay, F this, out of here, we make it, we sign the transaction, we make it onto the final stages. It might take too long, and then the transaction fails, you paid for gas, and you get nothing. You could get sandwiched by MEV attacks. There are so many things that could be happening. And all of this to say, on the most fundamental micro level right now, we have all of these problems that are fundamental if we're just going to be using smart contracts to be working with DeFi. And to take a very good analogy, we're in Italy, so let's step away from the smart contract world and talk about something that I love, Italians love, il caffè. So we have a good espresso in the morning, and we like it. We want to turn the beans into coffee. So whenever we want to be getting coffee, do we expect everyone to know exactly how to make an espresso? Do we expect them to know how to dial the coffee, how hard to tamp it, the amount of pressure, the extraction time? I mean, you're still going to have weirdos like me that still do it at home. But if we want everyone to have a coffee every morning, we cannot be expecting all of this to happen. And what do we do with coffee? What do we do to make sure that everyone can have a delicious cup of coffee that doesn't just taste like burnt water? We have baristas. And this is, in my opinion, what the big intent word is. It sounds very complex, it sounds very technical, but essentially, an intent is nothing more than a barista. I'm showing, oh, it's a bit cropped, but an example from this, going back to the smart contracts, comes from ParaSwap. Obviously, I'm going to be using ParaSwap because it's the one that I'm working on, but by introducing intents, we've managed to introduce a level of easier accessibility and abstraction that simply wasn't possible with the usual smart contract system. So in the same way as whenever you submit a usual trade, you have somebody that wants to be trading a token. But this time, instead of putting it in a smart contract where you have to be specifying all these things to be able to execute them, all you're saying is you're passing this intent. That's where the name comes from. I want to be trading this. And then somebody on the Portuguese network takes this order and relays it. And then somebody else does it for you. We call them agents, other people call them solvers, but we can call them, we're in Italy, let's call them baristas. People take your order, they're going to be executing it, and they're going to be competing on who can make it as best as possible. And then from here, they receive the actual final amount. This, in my opinion, is a huge deal. We managed to unlock so much with this. Just going again with the simple example, by making something as simple as instead of having an on-chain contract, you have somebody executing on your behalf, you're not constrained by the on-chain limitations. So just by introducing Delta, just by having a barista be able to execute the order from you, we managed to make gasless swaps because the user is not the one that has to be submitting the trade. The person can be submitting the swap on their behalf, so they can be sponsoring the trade. You have MAB protection because it doesn't actually go to the mempool without complicating it too much. Like basically, it's completely private, so there's no way to mess around with it. You can compete with the order. Different people can choose, I'm going to take this one and give you a better coffee. I can get this one and give you a better trade. And you even have an RFQ model, which is how a lot of decentralized and more traditional solutions work. And this is just the beginning. We can be expanding to cross-chain because you're not limited by blocks anymore. DCA, you can be having like on a certain basis, since you don't have to wait for I think it's 6 seconds now for an Ethereum block. You don't have to keep it within this anymore. It can be taking months for it to be executed with an agent. All of these use cases, even AI agents, the idea that like it doesn't even have to be a human executing it. It could be somebody connecting all of these things and then making them happen. This is all possible because you have baristas taking over. And it all sounds great, but just to conclude before we move on, I'm not saying, however, that intents are going to be the only thing that's going to be happening in the future. I was actually having a talk this morning with somebody else about this. Intents are going to be helping with mass adoption with this kind of flexibility, and they're going to be helping with making things a lot more simpler. But we still need smart contracts. And I see smart contracts, in my opinion, going, again with the coffee. I hope I'm not talking too much about coffee. We go back to the mocha. It's a resilient thing that even when bars are closed, even when nobody wants to make you a coffee, you're still able to execute it. And in my opinion, DeFi is going to become even stronger because it's not going to be a competition of like trying to make the most complex smart contracts that try to compete with traditional finance. You're going to have both the possibility of having flexible, unupgradable intents and these resilient on-chain contracts that nobody can mess with, anyone can input, no matter how weird the use case. Do you like having coffee with orange juice? No one is going to make that for you in Italy. But if you have your own smart contract at home, you can do it yourself. So how do I see, getting back to the title, the future of DeFi? I see it as two different ecosystems coexisting with each other. On one hand, we have the people that are still going to be working with smart contracts. These are the people that understand the complex nuances of the ecosystem. Everyone that's already trading on chain, probably not much is going to be changing for you on a day-to-day basis. You're still going to be able to specify the parameters. You're still going to be able to specify the slippage. You can do whatever you want, and you can trade in all of the exotic coins that you want without any limitations. But we need to get over the idea that for everyone to pay a coffee and for everyone to get onboarded, we are going to have to teach them what is gas, what is MEV, what is signing a signature. And this is where intents come in. By abstracting away the complexities and allowing somebody to get the equipment and get the best rate possible, we're able to deliver all of the advantages of DeFi, the finality, the transparency, the ability of having everything completely censorship resistance, without the constraints of the technical limitations. And basically, this is the future that I'm seeing. And hopefully, that beautiful graph we've seen at the beginning with stablecoin TVL grows even more once we start working more with intents. So thank you very much. And any questions?
Brilliant. Any question? Yeah, a couple here.
I mean, might not be directly related, but you spoke about micro steps, right, for mass adoption. One of the things that bothers me the most right now is that I cannot buy, like when I go on websites, I need to buy something I cannot buy with my crypto, right? Do you think this, the intent swap could be used also for normal, I don't know, like normal e-commerce to make easier for people to buy items with crypto and then just give to the merchants like USD or whatever?
I'd say so. And it's one of the strengths that we see from Intents, that it doesn't all have to be on-chain, and it all doesn't have to be in the moment when you're executing it. It doesn't have to be happening all within the single block. When you introduce the idea of Intents, we can start building more complex systems. So going back to what you're saying about real-life commerce, just off the top of my head, you could be introducing an Oracle system that connects like the off-chain item or the off-chain USDs with the on-chain onboarding. And if there is an agent that is willing to take this kind of task, that is willing to take the risk of going from the on-chain to the off-chain, then it can very simply do something like this. In a way, we're already kind of seeing it. I initially brought up the Monerium, one of the coins that's being onboarded after Mika. And it has a system where, like, by burning or by sending the addresses to a specific system, it actually gets deposited directly on somebody's IBAN account. So by going into this kind of intense system, you're not constrained anymore into getting everything crypto to crypto or getting everything in the specific block times. You just need an agent that is willing to take this kind of risk. I don't know if that answers your question, but basically, yes, I think it's definitely possible. Monerium. It's the same one. I don't know if you know Noses Pay. They're also around the venue. They work with Monerium to do. We can talk later. I can show you. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. One last question, and now we move to the next one.
Thank you again for the presentation. That was pretty inspireful. And so, like you mentioned, kind of like two extremes. So you have like do it yourself with smart contracts, and on the other side you delegate basically, and like you have agents. So I wonder, like, do you see an intersection between these two like extremes?
Yeah, I'd even say that it's already happening. So, for example, if you look at a service like Across, they're doing intent-based bridging. So the reason why a service like Across doesn't take as much time as a canonical bridging, for example, from Optimism to Ethereum, is because it's not doing all the on-chain verifications and all the different on-chain proofs to be able to get it. They have somebody that says, okay, I'm willing to take the money from here, and then I'm willing to send it to you in a different address. And it kind of lies in this middle point that you're talking about, in my opinion, because you still need to be on-chain savvy enough to understand how to sign a transaction, how different chains work, the advantages, disadvantages of each one of them, but you still have an agent taking all these kind of things. I feel if there is a niche, any agent is going to be able to deploy into it. So obviously in the future, it's going to depend on like how exciting that in-between is, like how many people are going to be willing to deploy agents on that middle field. But I don't know, I'd say at least for institutions, it's something that's very exciting.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, anyone else? Well,
Super quick, random one. Yeah, very quick. Thank you very much, great presentation. What was the .xyz site that you mentioned in the beginning that you got some of the analytics from?
Grow the pie. So
Grow the pie.
Like pie, like the baker.
Si.
Yeah, just growing it. It shows all the statistics about transaction counts, total value locked, and it just shows how amazing the L2 ecosystem is going.
Okay.
Don't believe the FUD, we're doing pretty well.
Thank you so much, appreciate it.
All right, I have a pull-up if anyone wants to scan it afterwards. Here you go.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Another round of applause, please. For Oxytocin.